20-year gag put on it.
Yeah.
About 900 odd pedophiles were named. Their names have been suppressed. More than about 600 children were reported missing from I think it was the Goodwood orphanage where he used to source his children from, and we're not allowed to know anything about it. Okay? Well, my father used to take them to our house right from the late 50s right through to 1965, and he would butcher them in a wooden house down the back. And he would sell their body parts to a friend of his who was the chief surgeon at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Somebody a young bloke in the skin diving club was going out with his daughter. I know these things. I used to go to the parties, etc. when I was a kid. Now, basically, my father was selling body parts, but my father had his other reasons. I think he was collecting things. He always had a filled surgical bag that he would roll out with scalpels and stitching stuff and everything. And from what I've been told from one of my siblings, he would perform surgery on these poor children before he would kill them. I have credibility here in South Australia. If you look me up on the internet, I tell the truth. Now, from the early 60s to 1965, when the butchering operation was shifted to a building not far from where we lived, I would have to, on a weekly basis, burn the remains of these children. And there may have been some adults, I don't know, but body parts, I used to have to burn them in a furnace every week. And we're talking, this went on for years. You think about the figures of the amount of body parts remains that I burnt in the furnace. I could smell burning hair. It was awful, right? But I didn't know what I was burning. But one day our cat got into the furnace and opened up some of the parcels for the meat that was inside. So I took the parcels out and I laid them down on the ground and I opened up everything, and I had like a medium-sized person's skeleton all cut up. The hands, the head and the feet were missing. Everything else was there. The backbone had been cut right down the middle, probably to make it look like a side of lamb. The flesh was fresh because my father was also processing these bodies, and him and his friends were eating them, eating the human flesh. And that's a fact. That's what they were doing. It was part of their religion or their cult or something, consuming human flesh. Now, this was a fresh kill. Don't know who it was, but it was obviously a child, not an adult. I showed my father, and he told me, he wrapped it all up, he put it back in the furnace. He said, "Andrew, don't you ever look in the furnace again. There might be bullets in there." Can you believe it? So I had to get a container of petrol, a plastic ice cream container of petrol, throw it in there and stand back and throw a match in from a distance. I was never allowed to look in the furnace. Next week, when I burnt the next body, I didn't know what I was doing until I was an adult. But there was a packet of bullets in there, and they blew up in my face, and I had molten lead hit me in the face, and it ran down my shirt and burnt me. And I looked up, and he was just standing there with a big grin on his face. And I said, Dad, there's bullets in the fire. And he just turned around and walked off. That's the way it was. In 1963, a friend of his called Anthony Munro, who I've recently had convicted in jail because he was doing things to me that he shouldn't have when I was a child, but I didn't fear him the way I feared my father. Now, he went out with a lad, a friend of mine, I won't mention his name, and they used to pick up bodies for my father and bring them back in the boot of my father's car. My father had two American Fords with big boots, and he had two. This is back when we didn't have much money in Australia. He was using these cars for transporting bodies, so he'd always have a car to use, but he had one out picking up bodies, right? And my mother heard the car come back, and she said, Andrew, go and get the travelling rug from the boot. I ran out, pulled the boot up, and there were two dead children in the boot in 1963. One was a girl. She was in they must have been in sheets, I'd say, that they used in hospitals then. One was a light blue. The smaller child was in a light blue sheet. And the older girl, who would have been at least 12, who went from one side of the boot to the other, was in a light greenish sheet. I pulled the sheet apart where her face was, and there she was looking at me. I ran inside and grabbed my mother. I nearly dragged her off her feet, and I dragged her out. By that time, and my sister Ruth had been made to stand there and wait for the car to come back. She was always a witness. Everybody in the driveway, and that's father's skin diving mates, two men that I didn't recognise that he told Ruth were policemen plain clothes. Whether they were or not, I don't know, but I didn't know them. They pulled the bodies out of one car and threw them in the boot of the other car, and then they all sat on the back of the car. That's a fact. It's just normal behaviour. That's what normally happened. There were bodies brought to our house all the time. And in the Mulligan inquiry, they came up with 600 missing children from the Goodwood orphanage. There are a lot of people here in Adelaide that are trying to have that lifted, politicians, etc., because they want to know who the pedophiles are, some 900 of them, and who the 600 children were. Now, my father used to make pornographic movies with these children that he'd take out of the orphanage. Now, I wasn't there, but my sisters were. And there were animals involved, like dogs, etc. The children spoke with English accents. You know, we're all...
And I've just finished watching testimonies given by her and her brother on YouTube, and this story is absolutely horrific. Dad was a prolific serial killer, but much more. He worked for the intelligence agency as a wiretapper. He was linked to a cult, the Freemasons, paedophile rings, hundreds of kids going missing over the years, and Rachel being ignored, and the police, at the very least, being inept, but at the very most, possibly being involved in cover-ups. So, Rachel, do you want to just tell us a little bit about you then? And
packages that were wrapped in butcher's paper. And between 1960 and 1965, he estimates at least one, possibly two, of these loads of packages would have to be incinerated in our backyard incinerator every week for those 5 years. So we estimate around about 300 of these cadavers. So basically, the cat got into the incinerator at one point. It was Andrew's job to burn them. The cat got into the incinerator and opened up one of the packages, or several of the packages, and Andrew recognised that, like human bones, he's a hunter back then and still is now. So he got the packages out and assembled what appeared to him to be a human skeleton, obviously not an animal. And the way that the bones had been cut was like the way a butcher would cut things, and obviously they were all wrapped in butcher's paper. Now, this all correlates with stories my father told me, that there was a particular butcher close by to our home that he said sold human meat. There was also a bakery involved with that butcher very close by, and he used to make jokes when we went past. He was in that mood. He had several altars. It was a very strange man. He would make these sort of nursery rhyme type sing-song statements like, I'll grind their bones to make my bread, insinuating that the bones of the children were ground up for the bread from the bakery, or that they put little boys and girls in the pies and pasties from that bakery. He also showed me that there was a particular emblem on the butcher called a King K that is still used as the logo now. on that particular butcher, and the Kincaid was a message to other cannibals that they could get their particular meat from that butcher. So, I mean, this is well outside the realms of most people's normal existence and normal childhood. It's just what we grew up with.
And in these cases, often they prey on the most vulnerable children in society, children in foster homes. Where was he accessing the children from?
So it was a combination of children from the cult. So according to the cult's tenet, each cult member would give up their eldest child or their firstborn to the cult. So that could mean a range of different things. It could mean sacrifice as baby or older. It could mean you were mentored into a particular area. So I was mentored. I was supposed to be a psychologist. I was basically mentored into a Bachelor of Science degree, which I had no science subjects in Year 12, no chance of getting into a Bachelor of Science degree, but because of who knew, I was put into a science degree. And I've got my Year 12 certificate on my Facebook site. I've got my transcript from my first year at Bachelor of Science to show the disparity. It's not possible for me to have got in, but I got in because of who he knew. And he was providing human cadavers and human body parts to both the Flinders and Adelaide medical centres, the two main medical centres in Adelaide. And so he had good friends there.